Now it's time for our homily, and Debbie Washington is our speaker. She's been involved in this fellowship for 10 years and has grown and changed during those years, as has our fellowship. Some of you may remember her summer homily about prayer, and some may know that she is one of the co-leaders of Adult RE. As you may know from the newsletter announcement, the title of the homily comes from a book she just finished writing after working on the topic for 12 years. But so she will tell us more about it.
Thank you. This is it. So if it looks like that picture's just been pasted on there with glue, it's because it has. I will. And you're welcome. Okay. So. Dear UU friends and visitors, thank you for allowing me to share with you about my book entitled The Nonexistence of the Gods. That's with a small g. When I put small g because it's any God, you know. And capital G for God, the one we usually think of as the Jewish Christian God. This is a critical review of Celsus. Some of you who may have known me to give talks before, I usually just put my ideas on a note card and talk from it. But I tried that this time and I rambled everywhere. So, so I have written this out and I am going to be reading to you today. I never set out to write a book. Let me explain how it happened. A friend of mine who had passed away, named Bond Harris, gave me a book to read. He knew I was interested in the history of Christianity and religion in general. He cautioned me not to lose the book because it was an out-of-print book. I took it home and put it on the bookshelf so as not to lose it. I had many responsibilities with my young daughter and my husband and my career as a teacher, and I lost the book. So I had to admit to him that I lost the book, and he replied, I can't even remember the name of it. I said, I know, but it's really old. And he said, and besides being old, is there anything else about it? To which I admitted I hadn't read much of it. He smiled and said, well, when you find it, just keep it. And I didn't know how many books he had, but like 300 books or more, you know. So years later, I found the book behind the bookshelf. It was a brown book with no title on the front, and it was called Contra Celsum, written by a man named Origen, who had lived in about 275 Common Era. He wrote it in opposition to a book that a man by the name of Celsus had written somewhere between 161 and 177 Common Era. Origen was a church father who was really doing his best to save Christianity. Well, later he was excommunicated, but anyway. He was writing against Celsus, who believed in all the gods. I really wasn't all that interested in what Origen had to say, but what was Celsus talking about when he wrote about the True Doctrine? Celsus was talking about how people in the Roman Empire should worship all the gods. He was saying, dear citizens of Rome, worship all the gods. Why offend the god of the field? Pay proper sacrifices to the god of war. We want to do well in that. Do you think that mighty Zeus will not be offended if you don't give him proper sacrifice and praise? And you know how a good book can grab your attention sometimes just in the first couple of pages. Well, this is the beginning of the True Doctrine. So, it says, Christians secretly make associations with one another contrary to the laws, because societies which are public are allowed by laws, but secret societies are illegal. The love which Christians have for one another exists because of the common danger and is more powerful than an oath. Christians were disliked by many people in the time that Celsus lived and the time he wrote his book, somewhere between 161 and 177. That's when he wrote his book. The opening begins to tell you why they were disliked. Early Christians met in secret, and that is true. That is both true and troublesome. So from the beginning pages, I was interested in what Celsus had to say, and I found comparisons in our world today. I also had to study to understand what Celsus was saying about the different gods that 90% of all the people that were in the empire believed in. Even by generous estimates, only about 10% of the population bought into Christianity. So I began to look up information on the ancient gods. At first, I would go over to the library at EKU, but I would have to sit in the reference room to read about the ancient gods because many of the books could not be taken out of the library, and so eventually I started buying my own books on what is now called mythology. I began writing this just for myself. I started it just even before JT and I were even dating and continued writing on it when we were dating and after we got married. Learning about ancient gods and ancient history sort of became a part of me. Even sometimes when JT and I would travel to new places, we would go to old bookstores and I would buy ancient books. I found a full leather-bound set of the works of Josephus. I bet y'all are dying to get that book, huh? Okay, whatever. I got that set at Habitat for Humanity bookstore in Florida. In chapter 2, Celsus lets us know that Christians were just a bunch of copycats. He wrote about it on page 43. Let's see. Next page. For if there was anyone who proclaimed to you that the Son of God would come down to men, it was the Jewish prophet, the prophet of the Jewish God. Yet as an offender, Jesus was punished by the Jews. His doctrine of the resurrection of the dead and of God's judgment giving reward to the righteous, but fire to the unrighteous is not new. Christians teach nothing new. What he said. Then I reacted to this line of thinking by studying other religions or the beliefs in other gods. So I researched the stories about Zoroaster and the ideas from the Persians about 600 BCE. By this I mean 600 years before the time of Jesus Christ. The Persians had these ideas. For instance, do you know that Zoroaster was called the Good Shepherd of the Poor? That sounds a little bit familiar, the Good Shepherd of the Poor. He claimed that there was only one God named Ahura Mazda. He claimed that this one God created everything. The supreme God was opposed by an evil spirit. How about this one? When Zoroaster began his ministry, he was visited by the evil spirit who tempted him to renounce Ahura Mazda. And you can study more about Zoroastrianism in my book or on your own. Throughout my book, I share with you many things which I had never considered before, and some which I had considered when I was but a child myself. Questions like, well, who made God? An example of a story that I had never heard of before was that of Asclepius. After I researched stories about Asclepius, he became a favorite of mine. He was a doctor from ancient days. It was said that he had even raised people from the dead. In fact, he performed this feat 6 times. He foretold futures to whole cities. He had statues carved to honor him. He was eventually raised to the status of a god himself. And here's an interesting message about him. His symbol was a snake around a staff, and this is still used today. My own drawing, isn't it good? Let's see. On the lapel of a doctor or a nurse, you might see the image of a snake around a staff. Or on an ambulance, on the back door, you might see the image of a snake wrapped around the staff. On the back door of the ambulance is where you'll find it usually. This symbol is still used in the healing profession. You might even see it on the nightly news. When the announcer talks about somebody being rushed to the hospital, right behind the announcer, sometimes you'll see this image of the snake around the staff. And it's the symbol for Asclepius. I like this chapter so much that JT took my picture with him. Oh, thank you. Thank you. With him, there was something I was going to tell you about. Here you go. These are all the places, this is the life emergency medical system. Okay, you know this? So there's the snake around the staff. And the World Health Organization, there it is. The rod of Asclepius, there he is. Now, you sometimes might see this other symbol down here at the bottom. This is by the U.S. Army Medical Corps. Branch plaque, medical corps, and it's 2 snakes staff. Now, that's Mercury, the god Mercury. Sometimes it'll have those little wings over it. People sometimes get this staff and this staff mixed up, but they're both kind of to do with the healing profession. Now, Asclepius. Okay, so I like this character so much that JT took my picture with him. Well, the statue of him that is located in the Vatican, not in the chapel. No. His statue is located in the museum. We had to pay to go into the museum. You do not have to pay to go into the Sistine Chapel, where, by the way, you can see the quite lovely statue of a dead God. That is to say, dead Jesus laying on the lap of his mother Mary. It is by Michelangelo, and it is beautiful. But in the museum that you do have to pay to go in to see, JT took my picture with Asclepius and with the statue of baby Asclepius. Remember his snake wrapped around the staff. There's also a god named Mercury with two snakes. Okay. These are just pictures I brought, and you can look at them later. I kind of put them up in the back, but it was really neat for me to be able to be there and, kind of almost touch it. I ended up liking some chapters, or books as they were called, that Celsus wrote better than others. Each one had its own value, and many of the questions or comments that Celsus had back then are still relevant today. For example, Celsus says that a God would not have a body like Jesus' body. And here's the really interesting part. Origen did not argue with him on that. There's an interesting article about what the body of Jesus looked like, and it's not this, a Caucasian-looking fellow with light brown hair and check this blue eyes. Y'all recognize this one? Yeah, that looks Jewish, light Caucasian looking and blue eyes. Isn't he great? It's great. Wonderful. Okay. There's an anthropologist by the name of Richard Neave, Neave, who was contacted to produce a 3D image of what an everyday Jewish man from the year 30, Common Era, looked like. They dug up bones, and they did reconstruction for what his face might look like. What are you doing?
Back row can't see.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Thank you. It's going to take money off your pay for that. Okay. All right, where was I? Oh, they dug up bones and they did reconstruction for what his face might have looked like. The image that he came up with was this. Now I'm going to turn it around. Okay? Now, if you cannot see this from the back, you can come up and look at it later. But you can Google or Bing, if you want to see this on your own home computer, just Google or Bing Richard Neave and Jesus, and it'll come up with a whole article. Several of them. Okay? This is what Jesus probably looked like. I actually put this picture in the 2 copies of the book that I let friends read last year, but I took it out on my finished product because it does belong to the BBC, British Broadcasting Company, so I wasn't sure I could put it in without paying them. Even though I saw an article of this same picture in a car magazine, it was like, I think it was Popular Mechanics or Motor Trend, something like that, and I'm like, really? Okay, whatever. So you can look at this picture later and more. And the phrase that even Origen uses, admittedly, Jesus' body was ugly. So I had never heard this before in my life, and I thought it was interesting. Sometimes I would get one of these flashes of insight as I commented at the opening of Book 5. Celsus, this is my response, okay? Celsus believes, as does most everyone around him, including the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, that there are indeed gods who can help mankind with triumph or rally to destroy them. He also has no problem with the concept of other invisible beings, such as daemons, and they spelled it a little bit differently, Daemons, Celsus does not, however, believe in the God of what is commonly called the heavens, has come down to live among men by the way of the exclusivity of the Jews, much less Jews and former pagans who now call themselves Christians. All these imaginary beings, such as Greek and Roman gods and daemons, are dismissed in modern society. Amazingly, we have held on tightly to the one God character that Celsus could not believe in. In the next 215 years, Roman citizens will switch, and they will be forced to switch, to belief in this one particular God. It was not an easy transition, nor completely smooth. In the face of modern logical knowledge of our universe, it is odd that we have not yet dismissed the need for a God altogether. Haven't you ever wondered if there really was a God? I recall the first time I questioned the existence of God. I was about 7 years old. Sometimes knowledge that I've gained in my life has not come from just research or study. Sometimes knowledge came from my own questioning as a child or as an adult. Sometimes knowledge is gained from the heart as well as from individual study. I'm going to close by sharing with you a realization that my husband and I had at the same time. It was a spiritual experience for sure. We were in Rome, Italy, standing in the Plaza di Popolo. It has a giant obelisk in the center of it. It was the spoil of war brought to Rome from Egypt. They put a big old cross on top of it. Then there was the wonderful marble statues showing the Greek and Roman gods on 3 sides of the plaza. Then there was a couple of Christian churches on the left side. And so JT says to me, well, you can just see it all right here. It's the movement of myth moving through the art. Wow, and it's all right here. And so I responded, well, you can't say that church over there is art. And he said, I can too, so we argued about it a little bit. That building's wonderful architecture, and I think that counts as art. And anyway, it's everything that you have been writing about in your book. It's all here. It's mythology of the gods, all right here in one plaza. So I had to laugh, and I was saying, oh my God, give me a pen so I can write this all down. Actually, I've been writing on this same topic for about 12 years. I finally printed more than 2 copies, so I have several copies. And if you'd like one, it cost me $16 to publish, to make it, but if you want one, it's $10 or whatever you want to give me. I actually paid somebody to proof this book. I did. But when I started reading it, when JT and I started reading it, there's typographical errors in it. I apparently couldn't spell the word had, H-A-D, and I left out the A. Anyway. I finally just had to say this is enough. This is enough of trying to understand the ancient gods and how they relate to us in our own time. This is enough of trying to figure out how phrases and names associated with gods cross that ocean and are with us even today. For example, when we send capsules into space, we name them Apollo, Gemini, and Mercury. Those ancient gods were all non-existent, and that includes the Jewish Christian God. I finally understand it. If you want to learn more about how I came to this conclusion, or the way the gods and the man Jesus, whom they turned into a god, then you can read about, buy a copy of my book, or you can read the copy that I will leave at the fellowship. If after someone reads it, they bring it back. Thank you for listening.
Oh, wonderful.
Are you taking discussion?
If it's an easy question. If it's an easy question, make it easy.
Spell Celsus.
Celsus.
Thank
It sounds like Celsus, doesn't it?
Yes.
Or it looks like Celsus.
Well, Debbie, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was
Thank you.
wonderful. I
Thank you.
have one comment to make. I taught a series of courses at EKU called World Civilization, and one of the things we looked at was the evolution of religion and how in smaller stateless societies we had multiple gods. But as we moved toward the nation state and the need for a power base, we developed one God who could control everything.
Oh, that sounds
So it was very nice.
that
Thank you
sounds
so
good.
much.
Yeah.
I would just like to piggyback on what you were saying about the Romans, because the way they got control was to say all that you had to do was to, correct me if I'm wrong, all you had to do was to light a candle or give a offering to the god of the emperor, and then you could worship however you wanted. But that's all you had to do, was to just give some kind of offering to the emperor's whatever, his place.
I never heard
And then you could do anything you wanted, and the Christians would not do that, and that's why they were persecuted.
I had never heard that, the lighting the candle thing. I've never
Well,
heard
not
that
lighting,
before.
I'm just some
Yeah.
kind of offering
Offering.
to the emperor.
Probably money. Yeah.
Anything to the, as long as you paid some.
And apparently they tracked it too, because you could have a certificate that you had offered to the emperor, to the gods.
Well, that to them, they were kind of something.
But apparently you could have some kind of a certificate, and that certificate could be forged in some cases.
I had never heard of that. I will say that the emperors became gods. After they died, then there was actually a process for that. And so after someone died, you could make them a god. So, I mean, it wasn't the first time that it ever happened. So there was a process for it and had a name and everything. So, yeah.
Isn't that similar to sainthood?
Oh,
After people, Mother Teresa and all of that, after people have passed away, then the church decides, or people decide, whoever, this person was a saint. So they go through the
Yeah.
process of, in a
making
sense,
them
is that,
a saint.
would you
I think
equate
it's the Catholic Church that does that. I don't think the Baptists do that.
that? No.
I'm just saying.
I think it's very telling that human beings have to worship something. Instead of just looking around and recognizing the bounty that is here and the beauty that is here and the majestic majesty that's here, we have to come up with something else to describe it all, which I think is a real failing of humans. I think, if we were present enough to just appreciate what is here, we wouldn't need this, big granddaddy in the sky.
I think following that, it's kind of ironic that we went from multiple gods to one God, because if you have multiple gods, then you have one for fall and one for spring and one for, you could have one for everything, and then you wouldn't. Sorry. The other thing I was going to mention was the role that anti-Semitism might have had. I don't know if you know anything about that, but it seems like anti-Semitism is certainly alive and well now. I don't know if it was then. It may not have been. But if it was, then it would have tainted Christianity, because Christianity came from it.
Let me explain to you why this part I do know. Okay, the Jewish people were very much accepted in the Roman Empire, because they did this. Not only did they always pay their taxes, but they offered up sacrifices for the Roman Empire, on behalf of the Roman Empire. So they didn't go to any of the big events that honored Zeus or any of the other gods. They didn't go to those, but in their own way, they gave up sacrifices for the Roman Empire, and that was understood. So in that regard, they were, it's the part about sacrifices that a lot of people today don't even understand, even though they go every week to that this God required a blood sacrifice, and most all gods did. And that, most all gods did, yeah. And so Jesus' blood was the one time for all blood sacrifice. So there it is. Yeah.
So our benediction is hymn number 411.